Welcome back to the show, guys. Before we start, a quick announcement. Top and I have teamed up with PurgeSuddenly.com to bring our listeners this awesome opportunity. From now until March 15th, any purchase of Nephilim Death Squad merch from TopLobsta.com will enter you automatically into a raffle for a chance to win a triple pack of Purge Advanced Parasite Cleanse and a bottle of Digest Dimes Plus from PurgeSuddenly.com. What if I told you that more people have died from parasites than have died in war? What if I told you that cancer, acne rosacea, multiple sclerosis, and rheumatoid arthritis can all be treated with parasite medication? With the triple pack of Purge Advanced Parasite Cleanse, you can rid your own body of these all too common parasites with ingredients like zinc, carrot powder, garlic, black walnut. It's made from all natural ingredients, not harmful for your body. And on top of it, the Digest Dimes promote healthy gut bacteria and aid in digestion. While you're there, any of the other products, as well as the triple pack and the Digest Dimes, can be purchased with a promo code Nephilim, Nephilim, for 10% off, and be entered into this raffle to win a triple pack of Purge Advanced Parasite Cleanse and a bottle of Digest Dimes Plus from PurgeSuddenly.com. And guys, don't forget, if you're looking for other ways to support the show, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Nephilim Death Squad, and you can help us out that way as well. All right, let's get into the show.
We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely incredible.
Oh yeah, dude. There's some Nephilim shit.
It's like we all know what's going down, but no one's saying shit what happened to the home of the brave. These motherfuckers, they're controlling us now, and no one's talking about how they made us modern day slaves. And everybody's just walking around, heading the clouds, who won't awaken to a dead in the grave. By then it's too late, we need to be ready to raise up. Welcome to the end of days. Everybody is slaves, only some are aware that the government releasing poison.
And I blew the intro. There, I got fascinated.
After the new ad read and everything, it was so smooth.
I know. I was like, man, I did such good work. I spent all day on that ad read. I'm sorry. You could do the intro, David.
He was in awe. Guys, welcome back to Nephilim Death Squad. I am David Lee Corbo, a.k.a. The Raven. That's TopLobsta. And today's guest is a very special guest in the world of biblical prophecy and understanding the Nephilim. I am very excited to introduce to you Gary Wayne. Gary, can you please tell the audience a little bit about what it is that you focus on and where they can find your work?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I focus on prehistory and connecting dots into prehistory as to how that's relevant about sort of a common history around the world that's also talked about biblically, and link everything back to the Bible and talk about how that affects our history, what's happening today, and what's going to happen. And one of my sort of concepts is that if you really want to understand end time prophecy, you have to understand prehistory, because most of the terms and the fuller understanding is defined in prehistory. So you have to learn about what was, what is, and what's going to be. And as the book of Ecclesiastes says, nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And it's all about why in the overarching signs that Jesus provides us in terms of the fig tree generation, the sorrows, and the third overarching sign is the days of Noah. And those are the exact same words that were used in Genesis 9:29 to describe the life of Noah, the days of Noah, which were 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood. And on both sides of the flood, we had giants and we had their beast religion and the secret societies, and they're all interconnected. And so we're encouraged to learn about the fuller context about that so we can understand what's going on today and how they're going to parade us into apocalypse again and try and lead as many people faithful to God away and into destruction.
Hey, Gary, you just reminded me of something. So you were talking about 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood is when Noah lived.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So we just had this guy, Ed Mabry, on, and he was theorizing about why that might be, why things like that might be. And he was talking about the speed of light and how it's diminished over time.
Yeah. No, I'd say it's simpler than that. Sorry to interrupt.
I love to hear it.
Yeah, it's really, and it's right there in plain sight in the Bible. So we don't have to be really all that sort of creative. So when we look at the demigods, these are the spurious offspring of fallen angels in human females, or as in polytheism, also accounts the offspring of female gods and human males, like with Gilgamesh after the flood, for example, the mother goddess Nin and Lukabanda, king of Uruk, produces Gilgamesh, just so people know where I'm coming from on that. So they originally created gods in the physical earth with flesh and the counterfeit spirit. So the flesh was immortal as well as the spirit. So what God did was he limited the number of years of the flesh to be 120 years, unless you do something scientific or otherwise to, extend that. And so we get that in Genesis 6:3, which is, of course, in the 4 passages that describes the original Nephilim, and that was designed to ensure that the physical body wouldn't carry on, even though the counterfeit spirits, the disembodied spirits, as they would be after death, weren't permitted into heaven and weren't permitted to go to sleep and weren't permitted to do the things that they would normally like to do
they weren't permitted to sleep. Did you just say, wow, that's
so that's mean. Why and I'll come back to that just in a second, because we're going to open up like all of these doors to go down through. So, and I don't have a lot of discipline. I'll go down them all given the opportunity, because I just love to talk about these things. So God limits life to 120 years in Genesis 6:3, and we know that that's not a commission of Noah, because the math doesn't work. And the Bible doesn't make math mistakes, and it doesn't contradict itself. And so I have a lot of faith in the Bible being accurate, and I defend it all the time against all of the alleged contradictions that aren't there. It's just the spurious side who are trying to seed faith issues and wedge people away from God. So we know that when we have the genealogy of Noah at the end of chapter 5, and the sons are introduced, and then we get the commission of Noah on the other side of the creation of the giants and the preamble to the flood story. They're bookended. That he enters the ark when he's 600 years old, and he has his first child when he's 500 years old. That's 100 years. That's not 120 years. And the math doesn't work. And when you take those words, and people hate me when I do this, and I have a great document, but when you take it back to Hebrew, it's talking about the life spirit. It's not talking about Noah's commission anywhere in any sort of, can I twist the meanings of Hebrew? I have a document on that for people if they want to know how we know it's the 120 years was what life was limited to. And it becomes kind of a standard of 120 after the flood when it takes effect, right? A lot of people are dying in the 120 and slightly above that until you get down to that number, like with Moses, for example, right? And the time of going into the land. So when we look at the disembodied spirits after their bodies die, because they're going to rot or they're going to be killed, right? And you do that, the only way you typically can kill one of these giants is take the head, so that they don't have an opportunity to repair their bodies. And we can talk about that later if you like.
Would you say that you can in order to kill one of these, you would have to use almost their own weaponry or technology? Because it seemed like David cut off Goliath's head with his own sword.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's because that's the only sword that was available, and he knew.
Okay.
So I mean, you would want a sharp knife. You won't get a second chance. You want to make sure that that sword is going to be, let's say, of a caliber of the ninjas. You know, it's got to be the best sort of steel.
Razor
Otherwise,
sharp.
you could be in trouble. And you know, he only took the head because he didn't want him to repair himself, because he sank a rock into the forehead, right, which is a death blow with that type of weaponry. But because they had self-healing powers, if you didn't kill them in a way that's so sudden and shocking that the body doesn't have an ability to repair yourself, that's why he did that. Then he took it to the Jebusites as kind of a foreshadow down the road. I'm coming for you when I'm king. It's just my speculation on that. And that's where Golgotha comes from. Cover that all off in book 2. And he took 5 stones, not because he thought he was going to miss. There were 5 kings of the Philistine Pentapolis there that day, all giants, and more giants even, but it's the warrior giants that he thought he might have to take on all 5 at that time. Now, coming back to the disembodied spirits, how do we know they're disembodied spirits? And again, I have a great document on that. If people get a hold of me through my website, genesis6conspiracy.com, contact the author. That's an email. Just name the topic, in a general way. And if I've got a document on that, I will send it to you. And I have a lot of documents, so don't ask for them all, because I'll ask you to come back and name it by topic. And it might take me a month to get back to you because of all the emails that I get. So be patient. So we know that these are demon spirits, as we would understand it, or they would be understood as shed in the Hebrew lexicon of the Old Testament for evil spirits. And
Gary, we're saying that the same demonic spirits that you would attribute to, like, possession, for example,
getting there.
These are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, is what you're saying?
Getting there, yes. So those are the evil spirits that are defined as shed, and then post-Diluvian giants in a similar way with the root word Rapha, 7495. 7496 is the evil spirit and the demon. 7497 is the giant. And they're all part of the meaning. And in there, seeing as I've gone to 7495, is that healing power that they had, because it means to heal. And it's thought that they had this healing power. In the Ugaritic text, it talks about them being giants, dynastic giants, and the ability to heal themselves and
Gary,
others, like the Merovingians. Let me just finish off on the, and then I'll let you back in. I just want to make this one point on the disembodied spirits. I could go on with the Ugaritic text on those disembodied spirits, but Jesus was dealing with evil spirits, unclean spirits, and devil spirits. And they're all talking about the same being, and they're used interchangeably. And you'll see this if you ask for that demon document. I'll show you the passages. They're used as the same spirit and interchangeably describing these type of beings. So there's no doubt. And what's interesting about the word devil is it's a bad translation. Typically, devil comes from diablos, as in Satan, right? And anytime it's describing Satan as the devil, it's diablos. But this is not diablos. This is a daemon, the Greek word. That's the source word for demon.
Interesting. So, so we're saying demons are definitely Nephilim.
Yeah, Nephilim and Rephaim.
Okay. I wanted to back up real quick because what you said reminded me, and I wasn't really aware of the healing power of the giants as being, it seems like something like a blanket term, like they all could kind of do this. But Hillary Clinton was asking a couple of years ago in her emails, she was asking for the rejuvenation site or something like that.
Resurrection chamber of
the resurrection
chamber,
chamber,
I believe it was.
Yeah. So in the occult, there's 2 theories. One is they had a natural genetic ability to heal themselves, and then the other one would be they had like sarcophagus or chambers, multiple sarcophagi that they would use, sort of like what you see allegorized in that Stargate series with the Goa'uld, where they had that regeneration sarcophagus, that there was some sort of angelic technology that was used to repair and regenerate. I don't know whether that's the case or not, but those are the 2 sort of understandings. So, and Hillary Clinton had a large interest in the body and the sarcophagus of Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
right?
And the buried Nephilim.
Yeah, and that is legitimate. That out of the State Department emails, that they had found what they thought was a sarcophagus of Nimrod or Gilgamesh, but it's Gilgamesh that's mentioned, and she showed an interest in that sarcophagus for that, either the technology or what could you do with DNA if you found that. And so Gilgamesh he's one of the largest giants recorded, and after the flood. And there's a Gilgamesh before the flood that's recorded in the Enoch Book of Giants, but Gilgamesh after the flood is a demigod, 2/3 god, 1/3 human, and he's in the Ugaritic text, and he's in multiple Mesopotamian texts. Again, cover all of this in book 2 for people who want to go deeper into it. And he was 11 cubits tall. 11 cubits tall, 4 cubits wide. King of Uruk. That would make him on a 21-inch royal cubit versus an 18-inch cubit or a Sumerian cubit, and measured in the same way that Josephus says, measure the giants at 21 inches for a royal cubit. And so that would make him 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide.
Crazy.
Way taller than Og. Og would have been 12 to 15 feet tall based on his 9x4 cubit iron bed. And then Goliath was 6 cubits in a span, and that would make him on a royal cubit as the king of Gath. It would have made him 11 feet 3 inches tall.
We've mentioned sort of the Greeks and demigods several times at this point, Gary. When we look at the pantheon, the Greek pantheon, is this an amalgamation of the pantheon itself being the fallen and the demigods, their offspring, being the Nephilim?
When you look at the Greek pantheon, it's a little bit more complicated. That it's the same in all of the pantheons. I think they're the same pantheon, just different vernacular names for the gods. So, for example, Zeus and Osiris as offspring gods, and Enki and Baal rule after the flood. Parent gods rule before the flood. And so when you're trying to understand prehistory, if you can sort of make that separation. So El in the Canaanite pantheon, he had Nephilim, and Baal creates Rephaim with Ashtaroth, according to the Ugaritic text, after the flood. So once we have an understanding of that, then we can look at the pantheon and the offspring of the gods. And I don't think, my personal view is I don't think the gods made offspring gods. I think it's just part of the larger host of heaven, or the Hebrew Saba, meaning an army of angels, and they just moved up to replace the parent gods who violated the laws of creation and created giants and whatever other crimes against humanity. They all went to the pit prison, and the offspring gods all move up. And after the flood, Baal, Ashtaroth, you could use all the other gods in the other pantheons because they're going to be the same names. They do the same crimes all within 100 years, or at least shortly after Babel. They would all disappear as well and go to the pit prison as well for the same crimes. And it's why in the Ugaritic text, where it's talking about these Rephaim and the assembly of the Tanu, which is the larger assembly of giant royal dynasties and appointed kings by the Baal Council of Gods at Mount Saphon, which we would understand as Mount Hermon or Sion or Sirion, that they were appointed with. They are the visible offspring that are representing these pantheons, the various kingdoms around the world on Earth. So they all set up throne rooms, and they all report directly to a specific one of their celestial mafia godfathers, who they swear their oaths to in their divine right of inheritance, like King Charles III just did. That's that ancient ritual that goes right back to before the flood, and then again after the flood, when that oath-based system through the assembly of the gods is set up.
I may be mistaken, but I remember coming across some notion that there was a correlation between the Nephilim and having blue skin. And I can't help but think of instances of Vedic gods and how they're often depicted with blue skin. Is there anything that you could expand on that with?
Yeah, I think there's this color of this really pale white skin, right? And so you could get to the blue in two ways. Is it could be a blue white, as in a blue light, also important in the occultic terminology for that skin tone. But certainly really pale in color. So like Horim, for example, in the Bible goes back to a series of words that are spelt similarly as Hori, which means, like white bread or very pale white. And so it had that look. And then if they were, this is my sort of speculation, if they were trying to do things to lengthen their lives, that you may start to see those blue tinges come in, and as their body would be pretty much in war, and maybe that's also why they get such distorted faces as well after a while, because of the things that they're trying to do. And those are particularly, as you say, depicted in Southeast Asia and in China in those theater masks, right, that they wear. And for people who don't understand what actors try and do, actors, to me, need to be very careful, because what they try and do is channel the characters that they're playing. And that's an occult term for channeling demonic spirits. And most of the heroes in those stories are based on ancient giants. So it's the disembodied spirits that they're trying to invite into channel that spirit. So yeah, I think there might be a connection there. I haven't been able in the research to totally make that sort of connection. And it's the same ideology that goes into the crazy clown thing with the trickster spirit, right? It's the same thing that goes on with the Joker in Batman, where in the European throne rooms, they would have these jesters that basically are a Joker, and they have the same white paint and all sorts of other crazy things. And that was the way they were able to place their occult priest in the court. And so he's there to make people laugh. That's the cover, right? Just as clowns do the same thing. That's the cover. And so they were really there to advise in religious things and advising the king. And if their advice wasn't what they wanted or it didn't work out, they would take a knife and they would slit them. And with that makeup, that's where you get the role model for the Joker and Batman. And what's interesting about that, Batman is based on a bat Nephilim character. And where that comes from is the Popol Vuh, out of the Xibalba demigods, who have a branch of those demigods called the Camazots. And that means the house of the bat. So if you Google Camazot, Camazotz, you're going to basically get something that looks like Batman's outfit. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
We have a friend of the show. I'm actually going to be appearing on his show Sunday, Paul of Understanding Conspiracy on YouTube. And Paul, one of his most researched theories is that of the modern day visage of the clown. This is fantastic, by the way. I didn't even know that was real.
It's stunning. It's stunning how spot on that is.
You can't make this up.
I would have thought that was a piece of coloring, a Batman set or something like that. I would have never thought that was real.
Honestly, it's better than They did it's the original, so they did it better than Batman. So it's big ups to them.
So Paul's research and mine in the areas that they overlap, they run very consistent. And I did a show with Paul before he stopped doing shows, and I did another one last fall because he just sort of got back into the routine again. And so, yeah, I stay in contact with him. And he's getting kind of a rough ride, but that's just because, people don't want to at first listen, want to hear some of the things he has to say, but it's not like he's not telling the truth, because he is.
Yeah, Paul has certainly done his homework, and it's one of the most fascinating theories, and it's, in my opinion, much more than a theory because it's based in so much evidence. And once you see the way that he lays it out, it's one of those things where you can't unsee it. It's fascinating how within our culture there are all these Batman, the modern day visage of the clown, all of these things that we take for granted. right beneath your nose are actually these things that
Sure.
pay homage to something
Yep.
much darker than anybody likes to admit.
Well, and it's very obvious with the Superman, which predates Batman by a little bit, right? And so, he's from the house of El,
Yeah.
the Canaanite pantheon, as this almost like this Messiah type individual. And, Jor-Al and Dur-Al are his and his father's name. And they got this S that looks like a serpent on the chest, which for Superman, but could be seraphim angel as well, a serpent-faced watcher angel that created most of the Nephilim and the Rephaim after the flood. So, yeah, it's all based on superheroes out of prehistory. And so, as you connect that back, because the occult really likes the Greek history, heroes were demigods, offspring of a human god and a human and either a female god or a male god. So, and they were the titans and they were the rulers, and they produced dynastic lines like the Herculides, which is a line of Herculean kings, and the Gaiji kings, or the Gaiis, depending on which transliteration. So these were the heroes of old, and so these are the men of renown. These are the heroes, as they're called in Sumeria, with Gilgamesh and his associated family of giants. So this is a common term. So when you get superhero, superhuman hero, with powers gifted to him by these celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to call them, it all starts to make some sense. And so superheroes that are just absolutely flood our lives today through entertainment are either based on the offspring of the fallen angels or a combination of technology of some sort, which they also had a technology beyond what we had today in terms of what my research shows that we're just catching up to.
I think you just summed up why our little catchphrase, we just say Nephilim shit. And it has invaded the culture to a point where it's out of our hands now, and people are saying it left. And Tucker Carlson was saying it for whatever reason, but we were saying it first. And it's just an embodiment of everything in culture. And I actually just pulled up this picture when you mentioned the seraphim. And it's like, it seems like so many girls these days are just intent on making themselves look snake or lizard-like, as like, because it's all like, it seems like an homage to the Nephilim. They're always like praising themselves.
Yeah, well, and if you pull up a picture of Akhenaten, this is a Rephaim bloodline giant after the flood, dynastic king. And this is over 1,000 years after the flood, and you see this serpentine face. So you have this long protruding chin, these very, very high cheekbones, this long elongated skull. Sometimes it's shown, or sometimes he's got this huge cone head hat like this one. He's got these slanted, large wraparound eyes that would glow because they were called the shining ones. And you're seeing a serpent when you look at that. And that's after intermarriage because of the fertility issue with the post-Diluvian giants that they had. And so they had to continually dilute to ensure they didn't go extinct.
It's incredible because so much of our society, I'm realizing this as you're speaking, is to this day inherently biblical. And people, it goes right under the radar. People,
it's my favorite thing. I love watching these people, the people you mentioned right at the top of the episode, Gary, the ones that are either atheists in 2024, which is a ridiculous statement to be, or people who look at the Bible and say, that's nonsense, when everything around you is pointing like bright neon letters. This year, look at this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, we live in a world that has nothing but the occult imagery, history, and genealogies and belief system in everything. It's shown in taciturn terms. It's shown in the arts. It's shown in literature, shown in the movies. It's shown in the government symbols. It's shown in the buildings of government and churches. And it's just absolutely everywhere. And people have been brainwashed to not recognize it. And so they'd be able to do things in plain sight because they know they can get away with it because of the preparation.
Gary, one of the things that punched me in the mouth with your book, so I picked it up when you were looking through papers or something, but It's within like the first 10 pages that I read. You were talking about, I believe, like the Greek pantheon again, but some of these rulers or these kings, they were named from Ionian, Dorian,
Yep.
Lydian. And I'm a musician, so I'm immediately thinking of, oh, these are the modes of music. And they just renamed them. I was going to ask, do you know anything about that? Why that name, why they would choose those names for music to describe? They're describing a major scale, but each step that you do creates a different emotion or evokes a different type of sound. So do you know about that?
Yeah. So when I talked about the organizational structure of the kings and the beast religions, and it's the religion that crossed over the flood as well, and we see it installed with Nimrod first, and it's referred to, whether it's through the Baalim or other references in the Bible. This begins in ancient knowledge. And so Gnosticism, which is the sort of generic Western term for the root polytheist religion, goes back to gnosis or knowledge. This is a knowledge cult. So where they take their history back to, and who the secret societies take their history back to before the flood, is to this bank of ancient knowledge that begins with the seven sciences that Enoch, son of Cain, disciplines the knowledge Cain had learned from Adam, from God, according to the Masonic and Polychronicon knowledge, and puts them into seven disciplines. And one of them is music. So when they're honoring their gods and their demigods who they worshipped, they do that by naming them in the sciences. So that's why all the planets are named after them. That's why Apollo space missions, you name it, they will put a polytheist name on it. And music is part of that whole process. Yes, it's an art, but all of these were considered arts or sciences in prehistory. And it's the same seven sciences that are used today. And why you have an initiatory society on the campuses, and you have degrees of the occult. Third degree would be first level adept in the old system, and they graduate them in black Cathar gowns because they're doing rituals and they're learning the first levels of mysticism with preparation in terms of the things that go along with that knowledge. So it's important to understand that everything that we are taught is corrupted. And they had four goals with this new religion that they wanted to house the seven sciences in, that merged with the fallen angelic technology after a few more generations, that took it to a level that we're just catching up to today, that destroyed the flood. They had four standard goals in that. One was to lead people away from God in any way, fashion. It doesn't matter whether it leads them immediately to worship the pantheon. Their goal is to make sure humankind doesn't reach their destiny, to be raised up like angels in the future time, and to judge those angels, and to be the inheritors of eternity. The second goal is to slander God in all sorts of ways, and to dismiss or not give him credit for anything. That's why creationism can never be part of the sciences, because the goal is to lead people away from God. And then to honor their pantheon of gods is the fourth one, which they do in their architecture, they do in how things are taught, how they are presented, how you move through the degree system, everything. And so then that would extend into government. That would extend into the courthouses with the legality of that oath-based system. So it's important to understand that the secret societies take their beginnings back to the mystery schools, right? Which the universities are basically the modern version of. But initially they were just teaching the first two classes of the bloodline elites, and in the old 4-class system or the feudal system. And so the third and fourth class were basically, bakers, tailors, things that they had to do, labor, small entrepreneurial class, and then a slave and a labor class below. So they populated all the first two levels, which included controlling the churches and the priests. It included controlling the education and who got educated. It, controlled the army at the leadership level, and the lower two classes filled out the pawns, so to speak, on the chessboard. So the foot soldiers, they controlled the thrones and the governments. So all of that was for the elites. So this system that we have is their version of the history that they want us to have, and by the various rivals within those bloodlines that can control the writing of that history. So we have to understand that we live and breathe, and we're like an island in this Gentile sea of polytheism that's absolutely everywhere, and we can't really get away from it. We just have to recognize it to sort of help us sort of make our way through this world.
Gary, so you mentioned the 4 things that they like to do to subvert humankind and God. In your opinion, what was the main gripe with the angels that were cast out of heaven? What exactly? Why do they hate humans so much?
Yeah, because the Adamites in Genesis 2 were created as the resolution to the angelic rebellion. And so the fallen angels, I don't believe, ever thought they could defeat the Almighty God, the God Most High. They always thought they could win perhaps a resolution to it, as in a treaty, so that they could have their own realm or their world, and Satan could set up his own throne, and they would be away from the oversight of God. But when we go back and we understand angels, we understand that they were created immortal with intimate knowledge, and yet up to a third of them have rebelled or will have rebelled by the midpoint of the last 7 years, as Revelation 12 talks about. And that's a lot of angels. So 10,000 times 10,000 is the number both in Daniel and Revelation for the loyal angels. So you can say that's 33 million fallen ones or 50 million. I don't care how you want to calculate it. It's a large number, or uncountable almost.
Jeez.
And so there's a lot that are fighting for their survival, because they know, just as the book of Matthew talks about, is the lake of fire was made for them, for their punishment. And the Adamites are created as the resolution, not that we were created immortal, because we were not. We were created with little knowledge, with little contact, and with mostly faith to choose God and to follow him. And through the Adamites and that free choice and faith comes the Messiah for the resolution to the Adamite plan. In book 3, I'll really cover all of this off in detail. And so the end time is that resolution. So what they tried to do at the beginning, right in Eden, was to stop that, because they don't want to be convicted. They want to have the realm of their own, and they don't want to be having anything to do with this sort of, as I described, their view of us as ape or monkey-like creations who are inferior, that why would they be raised up to rule over them? And so they were trying to make sure we were going to be wiped from the face of the earth, to be remembered no more, not to reach our destiny, not to be able to judge those fallen angels for their crimes against us as well as against creation. And their revenges have come ever since. And so the creation of the giants in Genesis 6 is one of those revenges. The spurious offspring was to ensure humankind was led away from God and was going to be wiped from the face of the earth, to be destroyed, to be remembered no more. And that would have come about through the war before the flood, because it was all about the violence and the wars, which in the book of Enoch, Azazel taught the arts of war and the arts of crafts to the giants to cause this violence in partnership with the Canaanite line. So the earth would have been destroyed on their own through those wars and the technology that they had, but God wiped it out before to start again, so that all the names in the book of life have an opportunity to have their time to choose God or not. And if you don't, that means your name is blotted from the book of life, and everybody will get that opportunity. So all of this God had foreseen. He's the Alpha Omega. Jesus is the Alpha Omega. They know the end from the beginning, and they're letting things play out so nobody can say, angel or human, we didn't know, or we didn't get an opportunity, or we didn't quite understand. And so it's just how things have to sort of play out through free choice. Angels had free choice. We have free choice.
It's interesting to think about that. So if the angels were here before, like if they were pre-Adamite, if they were on Earth,
Yeah.
pre-Adamite, they could have chosen to not tempt the first humans and not set this into cycle where now this ends again.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
It's just
They
such a
chose to do
beautiful
that.
plan.
Yeah.
Right?
They self-indict them all the way through, right?
Yes.
Their actions. And so one might presume then that, if as 2 Peter 3 talks about, that if a day is 1,000 years, that this Nahash serpent that deceives Eve in the garden and that goes back to, as a serpent, but the source word means enchanter, sorcerer, one who deals in oracles. This suggests that this serpent was already, as an intelligent, walking, talking being, larger than Adam and Eve, as they're described, as tall as a camel in the Gnostic accounts, had already gone astray by the fallen angels, and that the rebellion would have happened at least before Eden and before day 6. So you could have the Nahash and whatever other creatures created early on in day 6, and at the end of the 1,000 years, you could have maybe, or sometime during the people of day 6. And I think that's a different creation than Genesis 2, because the details don't sync. And I don't think the Bible is in conflict. I have a great document where I walk through that for people, and it answers a lot of questions for Christians about prehistory. But what it does show is that there was rebellion before Adam was even created.
So sometime in that first stanza, in between day 3 and 6, all this stuff happens. It's crazy to think.
You could even make a case. I'm not doctrinal on this, because as I am, in my own personal belief on the differences between the Eden creation of Adam and the day 6 people. It's not just additional information. The creation order is out of sequence, and male and female weren't created at the same time. And I just go through in this document I have, just list all of these differences, and it's just, there's no way that can be talking about the same creation. But you could also make an argument in Genesis 1 that you could translate the standard translation differently. So where it says in Genesis 2, the earth was form without form and was void and formless. You could translate that word was, which is Hebrew haya, as became. So if it became void and formless, and if you look at both of those words, they're kind of identical. It just covers maybe a few additional descriptions, but it implies something as a destruction, that it became that way. And that, you have the Genesis 1:1, it says heaven and earth was created. And in Isaiah 45, where it talks about God doesn't create anything in vain, he creates it to be lived in. That word vain is tuhu, which is the same word for void. He doesn't create anything in ruins. He creates everything at once when he speaks to have it lived in. And so you get an interesting passage in Psalms 104 that talks about the creation process. And when God sends his spirit, the earth is renewed. Well, that sounds a lot like Genesis 1:2, where the spirit is hovering over the chaos of the waters, and they haven't been separated. And then what's really interesting is 2 Peter 3 is talking about 2 Peter 2:3 is talking about this earth that had perished. And it's this planet that was in the water, that was out of the water, that's in the waters. And it's going, well, what the heck is that talking about? Well, that's the separation of the waters that's being talked about in days 1 through 6. To create life on the earth, you have to create the firmament. That's done through the separation of the waters. So if you're doing that to recreate, then what would happen if those waters had collapsed, as 2 Peter 3 is talking about, in a destruction of fire that's also reserved for the end time, keeping in mind nothing is new under the sun, what was will be again, in the book of Ecclesiastics. And you understand that the earth has a set of foundations as you put all the Bible passages together. I have a great document on this, by the way, for people. I'll walk them through it. And that the earth by fire would have been destroyed down to those foundations. And then it would have to be renewed. And if you destroyed it down to the foundations, that means the firmament waters would have collapsed. And that's why they have to be separated. And that the flood can't be the water because the whole earth didn't perish. It was just a temporary 40-day thing, and everything in the oceans was survived, but not the whole earth died, and the people in the ark were alive. So it's talking about something different, and a different type of apocalypse that was promised not to come again by water, but we get destruction by fire with the end time prophecy. So that may be a better place for the angelic rebellion. And the earth could be much older than what we think. And it could be a better place for dinosaurs. And with the feathers that they have, that would be, let's say, corruption of creation done by fallen angels before to reflect their serpentine nature, just as they corrupted the Nahash serpent that looked like their seraphim serpentine nature, by the time of the Eden account, and way before, probably right from the beginning, to worship the pantheon of gods. One presumes that they had the people of day 6 worshiping those pantheon of gods as well. And all of a sudden that starts to match up with a whole bunch of different things that we see in archaeology, in ancient history, and ancient legends, and the time frames. It just, if you get away from the idea that the only time frame we have with certainty is the genealogy back to Adam, the polytheists can't wedge anything against our faith.
It's so perfect. It's like you're in my mind, because I was figuring out how I wanted to get onto this track of um, going back to these pantheons, and how some of them were clearly these humanoid animal hybrids. And how does that sort of concept play into what the angels would have corrupted, but also maybe how does that play with these descriptions of these various cryptids that we find throughout the world?
Very, very good question. So we need to understand, first of all, of this angelic technology that would have DNA and genome modifying capability. We're just catching up to that today. And how do we know that that was part of what happened before the flood? Well, they get that chimera term from Greek mythology of manipulating DNA for these multiple species type creatures that they were creating, with tails of snakes and feet of vultures and bodies of horses and all sorts of different things. So King Humbaba would be a classic example, or Humbaba is another. There's about 3 or 4 different transliterations of the cedar forest, which is Mount Hermon in the Gilgamesh epic. That's a chimera being. So anyways, I won't spend too much time on that. So understand they had that capability. And when it says in the flood that the whole earth was corrupted, that's the Hebrew word shakath, which means to decay, to ruin, to pervert. Words like that the whole earth had become perverted and spoiled, which means the plant genomes and the DNA. So we have that going on as part of the puzzle, which is why you see that reflection of that technology in the superheroes today, I think, because they're just telling us again and in plain sight what they did before and what they're planning on doing again. So now
Do you think that's what this vaccine was about? It just seems like we have the non-GMO stuff.
Baseline technology for where they're going. It's not capable of doing what they wanted to do yet, but it's that digital messaging that will be done in a more advanced way with the beast system. It will be a completely digital medication that comes through their implant system. And the Davos crew announced this in 2007, 17 to 18, and they're really frustrated, and that's why they're ramping up AI this year, because it's not where it needs to be. But from that statement, they said people will demand this implant system through the healthcare system because they don't want it. They want to be free of diseases. They want to have longer life, and they'll supply interdimensional knowledge and stuff through it as it starts to come together for the beast system, and then eventually the mark of the beast. But getting back to the cryptoids, again, there's so many things that are going on all the time. The cryptoids, we have interesting ones that are Nephilim-like in their creations. We have ones that are quite smaller that might be Nephilim-like, like the little people. We have, as part of the elementals, the salamanders, the fourth group, which is a reptilian being, which is very much size-wise to a Nahash or a serpent being, which they may have recreated or saved some in the earth, off the earth, in another dimension, however they would have did it, along with the little people of the elementals in the three different groups. And you have the Nephilim, but you also have different kinds of Nephilim. So in the Bible, we get the mighty men of Moab. These are Gibor describing, I think, a Nephilim here in this case. It could just mean strong or whatever, because Gibor doesn't always mean a giant when it's describing it, like David's mighty men weren't Nephilim or Rephaim. You can make it a height for the Makathite there, as a Makatheme, as I redefine in book 2, and Uriah the Hittite, a hybrid giant that were part of it. And there's 2 or 3 that you could make that were of that sort of nature, and maybe some of the Cherithim and the Pelathim that were the mercenaries around David as bodyguards and mercenaries that he hired, but not the Israelites. But the lion men are really interesting because they're lion-like, and the men of Gad had faces like lions. Well, we get out of prehistory, both before and after the flood, interesting kinds of lion men on relief, some with human heads as warriors, as opposed to the gods being depicted as lions as well, like Nergal or Mahis or Bast, and there's different ones in each of the pantheons. Nergal shows up in the Bible, by the way. And so Arioch, king of the 4 Mesopotamian kings in the War of Giants in Genesis 14, means lion-like. And so you get these sort of connections. So what could produce a lion-like Nephilim? Because these were mercenaries, it would be a lion god, right? Like a Nergal or a Mahis, Sekhmet, and there's a number of these gods that are in the occult. So we have an interesting watcher that has one of its faces as a lion, which is a cherubim, and they have 4 faces. They typically, when they show up on Earth, they take one face and they choose a physical form. And we see the Anunnaki, for example, on reliefs in Sumeria, where you have this angelic being with a beard like Gilgamesh-like, and these huge wide legs and these wings. Like, this is not Gilgamesh, but it's a celestial mafia godfather that would have passed on those looks to a being like Gilgamesh, and with dark hair, which is different than the blonde hair and red hair ones, which is more common within the land of the covenant. And so you have a cherubim that has a human face, and then you have a series of demigods in other cultures, like the Xibalba and the Kamazots that we talk about, or the Popol Vuh, or the Tengu out of Southeast Asia and Japan. And these were watcher gods connected to the seraphim gods, connected as being part of that watcher hierarchy. And I cover the angelic hierarchy in book 2 as well for people, and sort of restructure it a little bit so it fits biblically. Like archangels aren't part of the watchers for some reasons in the standard model, which makes no sense because they're standing in the presence of God with the other watchers. So anyways, I got lost on that rabbit trail. But back to the cherubim, you have these images of the third one that I'll name is an eagle, a vulture, falcon, owl, however you want to describe it. It's a bird face, just as Horus is a bird face god, right? And so these are the Anunnaki that would produce those type of bird Nephilim around the world. And then the last one is a bull or an ox. And again, you get some accounts of, bull sort of imagery. What's interesting is in the definition for Nephilim, not only is it a giant, a tribe of giants, but a bully. And that's an important term. That's not just there because there were bullies. It's to describe this bull aspect of it. In the Ugaritic texts, Nephilim are referenced as bulls, just as the gods are referenced as bulls. And so when the Bible is taking a word back to its original meaning that comes from Hebrew, that is part of the original Semitic that's used in the Ugaritic text, those definitions, they have a fuller meaning for the understanding. So I think you have cherubim that had produced several different kinds of Nephilim, just as Gilgamesh is bigger than the red hair and the blonde haired ones, and even bigger than the ones that were in the Greek that are dark haired, which were like, Hercules or Orontes or Achilles. They're 12 to 13 feet tall, kind of in the range of King Og, the last of the Rephaim after the flood. And then in the Bible, we get this other, and I'll stop at this point, but I just wanted to make sure that people have an understanding how I think that we see some of these kinds of cryptoids other than DNA manipulation. Is you have a god called Nebaz that's listed alongside Nergal, and it's about Mesopotamian gods. And this is defined as a barking god. And so, okay, a dog-like god, like Caleb means dog and a mercenary, right? Just as dog warriors were mercenaries in history recorded throughout the earth. I have a great series on all of this stuff. You want lion ones, you want bird ones, you want the dogmen one. I have all of this in documents I can send people. Just name, as I say, name it. And so that brings to mind like Anubis, which is a jackal god. And he produced prolifically in Egyptian history, so much so they had to create a city for these dog Nephilim, and it was called Cynopolis. And if that sounds familiar, if you're familiar with cynocephalus, that's the Greek term for the dog mythos and the dog race that was created by the gods in their religion. And so that means dog city, Cynopolis. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. And we can take these things back biblically and make connections there, which is really kind of interesting. To go back to your comment before that, what's going on in history, the Bible's telling us about if we want to pay attention to the details.
So I got two questions. Number one, this is the, I guess, the sigil of the Rothschilds, and we have three of those. Well, I don't know. Yeah. I've heard you say some stuff about unicorns or horses with horns. So more in your face kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, and you have a lion on there as well. So typically the coats of arms are done with imagery of taciturn imagery that communicates. So every image, and you've got a bird-faced eagle in there as well. And that's another lion, and it's got a whole bunch of other things. So they created this heraldry, the royal bloodlines, the kings of God, Royal, transliteration for ELs, as in Baal, meaning Lord God or Master God, but in the fuller context, and particularly as the occult remembers Baal as. You have standards that are going to be created for heraldry, so that in older times they would take this flag while they're traveling in other countries, and those royals and the nobility would instantly understand their bloodlines and their celestial godfathers, mafia godfathers, right? So that's the imagery. So so you see two depictions there from a cherubim, one with an eagle and one with a lion. But now you have this unicorn, right? So unicorn has two different meanings in the occult. One is and I cover this off in book 2 as well. And you can I think I still have pictures in my file of some of these depictions of what these unicorns would have looked like, probably after the flood versus before the flood, would be the understanding. But these were beings, horses that were chimera-like. They have different, they like have serpentine tails, for example, different types of feet than what a horse would have. And then you have this single horn in it, right? These are chimera beings that were created originally for the Nephilim as their horses. They were bigger. So I'm trying to remember those Vienna white horses. There's a particular one, the name slips me, but that's the species that the post-Diluvian horses were created for the giant warriors. And just as the Persian king would have these giant horses that pulled an empty chariot for their god, because they weren't allowed in, but they would have as a demigod and their divine representative, they would ride in an identical one and he would be riding it. And so these were the horses after the flood initially that the Rephaim would wear into battle. So if people Google riders of the Sheh, Sidhe, these are Tuatha De Danann, which is another word for the Datanu, of the assembly of Datanu at Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text, the assembly of the giants, or the tribe of Danu. There's lots of different transliterations on that. They're the great big white horses with these pale skinned giants and this metal helmet on that you don't know whether there's a horn underneath or not, but the helmet has this gold horn on for the horses, right? And again, they just put their imagery everywhere. So they weren't these cuddly little cute little horses that were playful and didn't hear the calling because they were playing. They didn't get to the ark because they were chimeras. They were perverted. They weren't called. That's
I'm going upstairs and I'm throwing out all my daughter's unicorns. I'm going to be like, this is nonsense.
I have to say,
yeah.
For a while, I was looking at this situation where children's entertainment was inundated with unicorn imagery.
Yeah.
I mean, and it was directly related to like the LGBTQ scene as well.
Yeah.
Like somehow these two things are synonymous with one another. And I found myself going, what does this have to do with the other thing? And why are they pushing this so prevalently within children's entertainment? And so I started to try to go down these rabbit holes, and I started to find these notions that the unicorn was synonymous with some symbol of the Antichrist. And I don't know how much that actually holds. But I have had in my mind. Oh, yes.
So, part 2. Horses for giants. Part 2 is that in the occult, and understand that horn is also a allegory for the third eye. So it has the ability to reach multiple dimensions and have communication and receive knowledge. Keep that in mind. In the occult, there are two kinds of unicorns. One's this physical being of the earth that the demigods made use of, and one is a heavenly being of some form and a watcher of some form. And so you have to sort of dig into it, and it has a source of great knowledge that, is metaphorically transmitted to the third eye in the occult, or the horn as the allegory for it. So if you understand that the Nephilim, the celestial mafia godfathers, as the fallen ones, Nephal is the root word for Nephil. Nephal is the word fall, as Satan fell in Isaiah 14. The Nephilim of the Shemaim, of the heavenly ones. If you understand that they counterfeit everything, just as Satan wanted to have his throne like God and to be like God, they counterfeit everything. So their whole angelic Saba army, host of angels, is a counterfeit. So they have the same levels and everything. They just are fighting against God. They're supporting Satan and the council of the gods. And so you have this depiction of white horses carrying the chariots of the gods, right? And so the easiest ones to go to, there are some in the Vedas, but the Greek ones are the most obvious ones that we can get a direct connection to. And in these chariots of the gods, they're pulling Apollo, or they're pulling Zeus, and they're pulling several different gods, but they're not all depicted as just white horses. Some of them are depicted as unicorns. So now you're saying, well, that doesn't make sense. There's nothing I can find in history that these unicorns could fly like reindeers. Like it's a reindeers as a horn god as well is another imagery for pulling Santa's chariot, but that's another rabbit
I was
hole.
going to say, don't ruin Christmas for me, Gary. It's too early into the year.
Only in December will I come out and talk about some of those things. How's that? When it's a little bit more to the time. But so anyways, these are the chariots of the gods with these unicorns pulling God's chariot. Well, biblically, we have in the Psalms and Ezekiel 1, 3, and 10, cherubim that are pulling the chariot of God. And so this is an allegory for cherubim pulling. And why you have that unicorn as a cherubim on the coat of arms. Just as the Windsor has a lion and a unicorn, and many of them have dragons on them and serpents. That's going back to the Seraphim Watchers. So this imagery is understood as being rebellious cherubim watchers with the counterfeit vision that we get of God's chariot in the vision being pulled by cherubim. So again, understand that they take their bloodlines, they keep their genealogies, Rex Deus, kings of God, Royals, kings of God, back to specific Nephilim patriarchs and Rephaim patriarchs, and to specific gods. So when they swear their oath, they're not swearing an oath to the God of the Bible, but to a specific celestial mafia godfather.
Incredible. And I mean,
and
just
then,
the fact.
And one other thing, and when you see different types of images on their heraldry, like different angelic beings and other things that will be in there for some more human bloodlines, that is the scioning in of, or the grafting in of other bloodlines, of other Nephilim bloodlines or angelic bloodlines to increase their ennoblement and a higher position in their hierarchy.
Wow. I was going to ask you if there's any veracity to the claim of like the Rh negative bloodline.
Yeah, I think so. So the world has about 15% of the population as Rh negative. And so the Windsors are O negative, for example, which is the most sought after, and it can be used with a combination of all the other types. And that most of the royals around the world are negative bloodlines. And most of the presidents who would take their genealogies back to, let's say, the Plantagenet, which is the junior offshoot of the Anjou, have O negative blood or a negative Rh negative blood, except for Reagan. I haven't done the last couple of presidents, but it's too much of a coincidence that they're putting their pseudo blue bloods in place over in America. And so
you should look into Trump, because there's an idea that they're testing him to be a part. I think they think he's a part of the bloodline of David. So his bloodline would be very interesting.
It would be very interesting. And in the occult, you have the white hats and the black. And understand they still worship the same pantheon of gods. One has a better interest for humans. The other one just wants to sacrifice us and make us disappear. But at the end of the day, it's the same result that they're working for. So you always have to be aware of the ones who are of the elite, who say they're looking after our interests. There's white magic, there's black magic. It's a standard. There are good witches, there are evil witches, there are good magicians. It's just they're micro dualism versus the macro dualism of their head god, which is the equal of the God of the Bible. That war goes on forever, which from a monotheist perspective, we know that it ends. But Rh negative blood is in, close to 30% of the population in Europe. Big concentration. Within the Basques, it's, depending on which survey is being done, it ranges from 50 to 80% Rh negative. What's interesting about the Basques and their mythology is they call themselves Homo Atlantis, and that they were the ones who survived Atlantis, that populated Egypt, Mesopotamia, Scythia, and then settled into southwest France and northern Spain. So interesting stuff. And they were the ones that were pushed out of Europe in a bloodline purity issue in the Basque diaspora. So you start to understand some of the rivalries that go on, and the bloodlines that moved out of the Middle East were these lower level of purity of bloodlines to what the Basques thought they were superior, just as the Putyanan bloodline claimed superiority over the Western European ones that produced the junior offshoot of the Romanovs that was almost wiped out by social masonry, which was created by the Western bloodlines to destroy rival bloodlines like the bloodlines in China, like the Kaisers with National Socialism, same part of social masonry with the royal bloodlines in Germany, and eventually, brought the Habsburgs to heel as well. So we need to understand that. So bloodlines are important, but it's not the key indicator. Bloodlines, as an Rh negative, they can skip a generation and puzzle sort of people. We got all of these different traits about people of Rh negative blood that have more occult experiences, are generally more pale skin, more red hair, more blonde hair, more blue eyes, more hazel eyes, higher IQ, lower blood temperature, body pressure, high IQs. I think I already mentioned that, 135 plus. All these different traits that they have, but it's not necessarily the Rh negative. It's the gene that produces the blood, because they're missing the D antigen, and they're missing an antigen that you can't add something to a bloodline if it's missing something, right? It doesn't make any sense, and that's the general argument. But if you understand it's the genes, and that starts to answer how it can skip a generation as well. I have documented on all of this. If people want to get a hold of me, I'll send it to you. Just go through my website, genesis6conspiracy.com. Contact the author area. And that this bloodline is through the gens, the genealogies that they track. So in book 1, I call it the gene of Isis, as it's known as sort of a doctrinal thing of a mother goddess, as a fertility goddess. And the root word for Genesis in their belief system, beginning of all things, right? Beginning of life. And that, even like Ptah has a image of DNA in his symbolism, and symbolism for wisdom was serpent, and you have an intermixing of serpentine imagery with DNA imagery, just as you have on the medical staffs with a dual serpent, which creates a DNA type of look as well. And it all goes back to that ancient knowledge, and the Hippocratic Oath, and everything is also all tied into the gods that they worship. And so in book 1, I talk a little bit about the Elby gens and the Elven gens, or the fairy gens. Fairy gens is more allegorical of a matriarchal bloodline, of the fairy bloodline. You could also say there's a dragon gens as well, of the patriarchal bloodlines. But those are allegories. But as you take it back to specific gens, is the Elby gens is a specific gens to a specific patriarch, as it's defined out of Latin, with gens being descendants and genes of a specific patriarch that all of those people amongst that gens take their genealogy back to, and pale and white in color, right? Elby is, as you take that back, both in Latin and other European languages, all means the same sort of thing. And in book 2, I also talk about the Julia gens, which is the black nobility of Italy, and taking the bloodlines back through Julius Caesar, Augustus, through the senators, and back to Romulus and Remus, and then to the gods that produced Romulus and Remus. So understand it's those genes that they're looking for, which is why they have a genealogical tree, which is why they have, looking for your genealogies, because they want to eventually bring all of this back in and find that spark of the divine. The 1,000 points of light to set up their universal religion and universal government and help them evolve into godhood. So, yeah, I think Rh negative has a significant sort of marker, but we should be focusing more probably on what gene it is that would produce the Rh negative.
Would you say that they're like, are they trying to bring about like a Moshiach, for like lack of a better term? Because they're not they don't follow Judaism, obviously, but it seems like if you're trying to continue this bloodline, you're waiting for this one thing to come. And then it has me thinking about Israel on the map. That's super important. Is that like that part of the land, is that actually what we're talking about historically? Why is it so important? The bloodlines that go there, who belongs there? What is going on in that case?
So if you're going to produce as they want to produce out of the royal bloodlines, the one who's going to be the king of the world, it's going to be one dynastic family, and there's a rivalry, right? So from a Western belief system, they've adopted and scioned into their genealogies bloodlines from King Saul and King David. And allegedly, and I think absolutely false on this latter one, from Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And they have their accounts of him surviving and marrying and producing children. And these have all been grafted in to dragon messiah wannabes. And there'll be multiple antichrists in the end times. We have to be careful not just to point at King Charles or other ones that may come along, because there's going to be several, and we're going to be deceived by one who Antichrist needs to claim as the true Antichrist to counterfeit everything that Jesus does and come before Jesus, right? So everything has to be weighed out from a chronological perspective and what the Bible says. So we don't want to get too far over our skis when we're trying to talk about if we're saying King Charles III is Antichrist or Trump is Antichrist. But if you're going to bring along the Jewish people, there's going to have to be some sort of pedigree back to David. And to bring along Christians, some sort of pedigree back to Jesus. Because they're going to de-deify Jesus to bring it back into the fold of polytheism, because they say monotheism went rogue, starting with the monarchy. And that one of the bloodlines that I talk about in book 1 and also in book 2 is the Anjou. And the Anjou are bloodline descendants out of the Merovingians, to shorten the genealogy, and 3 of them show up in the creation of the Knights Templar: de Bouillon, de Payan, and Anjou. And there's other royals in there because they're all royals creating this society. And then they form the lower one that's officially becomes the Templars in 1118, when the higher one separates and they create the King of Jerusalem title for King Baldwin II Anjou. That is currently held today by King Philippe of Spain, holds the current King of Jerusalem title, inherited from Juan Carlos, inherited from the Habsburgs, who had it before that, who inherited from Lorraine bloodlines, where that Templar line of Anjou came from was the Lorraine region, as did de Bouillon, as did de Payan, all royal bloodlines out of Lorraine. And it links back to this crowning of Baldwin II Anjou, declaring that through their pedigree and their genealogies that they have King Saul's bloodlines grafted in, and Benjamite bloodlines. And that in the time of the Exodus and the Wars of the Covenant, that Joshua awarded Jerusalem to the Benjamites.
I don't.
And I'm not saying they're going to produce the Antichrist. They're just one of the bloodlines that would want to produce Antichrist. And the Anjou have 2 other rivals, one from the von Habsburg bloodline and one from the Savoy out of Naples, the Italian bloodlines, that through that Middle Age intermarriage and stuff and the skullduggery that went on in that time also say they have a claim to the King of Jerusalem title. So even within the Anjou, you've got bloodlines wanting that title that Antichrist will be crowned with in the abomination in the end time.
I don't want to derail too much from the bloodline, although all of these things are connected. But you mentioned before going back to the cherubim and how they had four faces, one of them being a bull.
Yep.
And then you talked about these bull-like aspects of the
Yep.
Nephilim.
Yep.
How, if at all, does this connect to the Canaanite deity that has become sort of a very popular speaking point in recent years? What with the leaked emails, I believe, between Podesta and Hillary Clinton, Molech or Moloch, often depicted as a bull
A
that they
bull,
would
yeah.
sacrifice children to.
Yeah. So this is the Baalim gods, where Molech comes from, and he's brother of or son of, but you could go either way coming out of prehistory. More likely brother to Baal, just as Mot is a brother. So part of that original Baalim council and some sort of bull god. So he was probably a cherubim versus a seraphim, serpent face god. Most of the imagery on the councils are serpent or dragon face, but you do get some other ones that are less, that aren't serpentine, like the lions or the falcon gods or the jackal gods, like Anubis. And so one presumes that that's a cherubim taking one face that would be part of that council of gods.
So we have this picture that we're painting of all of these sort of animal hybrid, whether they're of the seraphim, whether they're of the cherubim, and then also how that connects to these cryptids. And Top and I think we would probably agree on this idea that in at least I know in my opinion there seems to be an uptick in not only cryptid sightings but also in just overall paranormal experiences. I can't tell you daily on
Yep.
Twitter, where I spend a lot of my time, um, constantly inundated with these sort of demonic possession videos where people that it's so overt in the way that they're behaving that people
Yep.
have no longer started attributing it to mental illness. A lot of people are waking up. We recently had a guest on the show, Dr. Jerry Marzinski, who was a clinical psychologist in the field for 35 plus years, working directly with schizophrenia. And at the end of the day, when he packs up and retires from the field, it is his contention that these are actually demonic entities that these people are being oppressed by or possessed by. And so I say that to say that these mental breakdowns that we're constantly seeing on video, on social media, more and more expose themselves as being sort of demonic possession. Now, my question to you is, do you feel that we are in an upswing? And I suppose I'll cut straight to the chase. Are we moving more into this time where things will be, as the Bible says, as the days of Noah? And if that is the case, then what might we expect?
Well, what we can expect is in the days of Noah, we had giants walking among us. We had the gods walking amongst us. So we should expect that back. And so as we get closer to the last 7 years, you're going to see more of the angels involved in the earth that aren't in the abyss prison or the pit prison. But they'll be rejoined by those in the pit prison before the midpoint of the last 7 years when the pit prison is open. And out of that will come the worst of the Nephilim and the Rephaim that are called the terrible ones, that are locked in the sides of the pit prison that and are described as those ones who did horrible things to humans on earth before they were killed. in Ezekiel 32, and they're talking to Pharaoh, just as the mighty, the angels that are in there, are also talking to Pharaoh in this really sort of creepy dual prophecy that is very interesting to look at. And I have documents on that, and I also cover them off in the new book for people who are interested. And these terrible ones are it goes back to the Hebrew word erit and eritim. And so the worst of those ones are coming out of the pit prison as well. But not all the demons are in the pit prison. But what they can't do is interact physically with the world. So they need something called an oikotarian. And an oikotarian is a dwelling place for the spirit. So we get that word twice in the New Testament, one in Jude 1:6 for the habitation of the angels that they left. So the oikotarian, the dwelling place for a spirit being, they left that dimension. They can be here in the physical world, but if they want to interact physically, they have to create their oikotarian, which is the soul and the body. Spirit comes from heaven, soul in the body is the oikotarian in the earth. It's also used as the house of heaven that we're longing for in 2 Corinthians 5:2, a dwelling place for our spirit in heaven, just as the angels have to be created like angels. Although we have a new body that's going to be new, that's a little bit distinct for the resurrection, but similar ideology. So that's how they passed on their DNA. But these disembodied spirits, ones who are in dry places and need rest, if they want to rest or interact physically in the world, they have to possess a body. Trouble is that's not generally a symbiotic relationship, because they're going to suppress the host. And you see that war going on when you see these crazy people. Now, in the occult, they believe that they can control demons with rituals and certain words and things. And so the adepts who are knowledgeable in this, which intersects with the crazy clown, the shamans, the gestures, they believe you can bring in demonic spirits to provide you more power and knowledge, and you can control them. I don't know whether that's true or not, but I know it's symbiotic, so maybe they don't mind letting that demon take over more control of their body. But again, it's not ideal, because who wants to share a body, right? It doesn't make any sense. So for those ones to interact physically in the world, they have to create clone bodies for them that don't have a spirit, that can't be provided a spirit, because the spirit only comes from heaven. So they can clone cows or everything that they want, but they can't make it live long enough because there's no spirit. And clearly we're told New Testament soul, body, and spirit, and only God and Jesus can separate the spirit from the soul.
Could this be like an L.A. Marzulli kind of talking point where he talks about the abductions and maybe like cow uteruses and male sperm, creating some kind of an army, some kind of a vessel or homunculus to put these spirits in?
Well, so yeah, they're going to need oikotarians. So do we get any evidence of chimera type of beings coming back in the end times? So, I think we'll see some of that with some of the clone bodies and transhumanism, but where you really see it come to life prophetically is as a result of the opening of the pit prison in Revelation 9, where you have, as seemingly not part of the first woe, but an extension thereof, this 200 million man war that a lot of people says has to be Armageddon. Except that it's not. This is the counterfeit. In my understanding of prophecy, this is the counterfeit Armageddon Antichrist will come to power on. So if you look at these creatures, these are chimera beings with riding chimera horses. Like, it's absolutely bizarre. And they're the same descriptions that are described in Joel 1 and 2. And Joel 3 is the Armageddon War. So you have two great wars going on. And in book 2, I actually put those descriptions side by side together to show people that they're talking about these same creatures. And I think these are those chimera army or the Chimera Oicotarians that they're creating. And I think it's the same as the Gog War in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that happens in the last days and before second Exodus, after the army is buried in Ezekiel 39. So we know it's in the end time, and this war is going to be before second Exodus. And so Ezekiel 38 and 39 really is quite interesting because you have Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, as the leader of this army. Well, Gog doesn't show up in the Bible except in this battle, and then the battle that also is a Gog war at the end of the millennium when Satan is released again. And Magog shows up. Magog shows up as a descendant of Japheth, who people move into the Scythia area where a lot of the giants were living as well. And so I think what's going on here is that name was changed by biblical writers to either reflect the giants that they went to live amongst after the flood, that 100 years before the flood, or I mean after Babel, after they dispersed, right? And the giants have taken hold everywhere as the Indo-Aryan groups, or the individual takes a name in honor of a giant. So we have Magog listed as giants and Gog in England as protectors of London. But typically after the flood, a lot of the giants are named after post or antediluvian giants, just as Gilgamesh has a name of a giant that he's named after that's recorded in the book of Enoch, book of giants, which is before the flood. And we know Gilgamesh in the Epic of Gilgamesh is 6th generation after the flood. So we know that's a post-diluvian second incursion versus survival. And so who produces giants as a god in anywhere in the world who may have had a son named Gog or Magog? Well, that's the parent god Iapetus from before the flood, who creates Gog and Magog. So they would be as one of the terrible ones actually in the pit prison. And Meshech is listed as one of these terrible ones in Ezekiel 32. So Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech, this could be the resurgent of these ancient giants that are leading and fighting these wars. That will roll over into Armageddon as well over 3.5 years after that. And that these Oicotarians will have to be created for these disembodied spirits. And what's also interesting about Meshech, and it's interesting that Tubal and Meshech, which are talked about in Ezekiel 32, they don't go to the pit prison yet. And Meshech is the chief prince of, Gog is a chief. Gog of Magog is the chief prince of Meshech. Meshech is the etymological root for the city of Moscow, of the bloodline Romanov.
Whoa.
And the senior bloodline of Putin, who Putin partially takes his name from and declares a bloodline link in the newspaper stories that were out in the early 2000s in Russia. And Kiev was the original home of the Putin dynasty that starts their branch operation up in 1000 AD or so with Vladimir the Great, who Putin honors, and the Putin name comes out of nowhere in about the 1850s. And typically with the Putin, and if they had marriages out of wedlock, which they did quite often, they would give them only part of the name. And it's thought that that's where Putin comes from, because there's no etymological source or genealogical source to the name Putin before the 1850s. So it comes out of nowhere with his grandfather, and his father moves to St. Petersburg, and that's how he ends up in Russia. And he's trying to recreate the Romanov dynasty according to what
you're gonna make this a 3-hour podcast, Gary, because now you're moving this into. I was just about to say, I was like, I want to respect your time, but I have to ask. I have like five questions.
Sure.
Because so I look at, I pay attention to geopolitics, and I look at kind of like what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, and there's different opinions on it. But now Now I'm kind of perplexed on this. Like, would America then actually be on the right side, or I guess it's white magic, black magic, if they're trying to keep Putin Yaski away from Kiev?
Yeah. So
Is
what Putin is saying is I'm not against the New World Order, or as I call it, the Nephilim World Order, or the Nephilim World Order.
Oh, that's a T-shirt. That's a T-shirt, Gary. Thank you.
Of the 10 kings of Atlantis that they're trying to recreate, or the 10 regions that the Club of Rome set up, or the 10 regions the UN set up, or the 10 kings and the 10 horns and the 10 toes of end time prophecy. He just wants a larger role. And you can look at Xi in the same sort of format. They want a larger role. And again, when I talked about social masonry being launched on the Chinese dynasties to bring, and it was taken over by communism, two major bloodlines out of the dragon kings from the dragon creator gods, seraphim gods, dragons, same thing. Seraphims are six-winged dragon angels with a serpent face. They had two main names to their bloodlines, one of an Eastern and one of a Western. So Li, different formats of Li, and XI for Xi from the Xia dynasty, XIA, and the current president of China is from the Western bloodline, trying to establish an ancient Chinese empire and larger to incorporate, in his view, from my understanding, and this is my speculation on an add-on, that all of those kingdoms that were created in other countries, whether it's Korea or Vietnam, were all bloodline branches and junior offshoots of the two bloodlines in China of the dragon creator god. So it would be in that worldview, just as with Putin, or Putin, I mean, to try and reclaim those thrones as part of their enemy. So Kiev is the holy city for Putin in his view. And guess what he also has up as his imagery? He has the double Anunnaki head, the double eagle. I mean, you couldn't be more in your face. So look for what is going on behind the pablum that we're told through the fake news, to what's driving these wars and things. It's about the rivalries and the geopolitical wars and rumors of wars taking place to establish those 10 kings in the end time. And the US is nothing but attack dogs for the Western European bloodlines.
Man, it's so. Would you compare the New World Order to like the Tower of Babel or something like that?
Because they want to bring back that Tower of Babel, where you had an Antichrist figure, Nimrod, ruling over the entire Noahites, the human race, and introduces the Enochian mysticism from the antediluvian epoch that he receives, along with the knowledge, according to the Gnostics and secret societies, that the location to the knowledge of the antediluvian world was located in 9 vaults underneath the pyramids, 36,525 books of Enoch, son of Cain, not Enoch, son of Seth, the one who created the 7 sciences that merged with the angelic technology. Hermes finds the pillar that floats, finds the knowledge, and the religion takes that back to Nimrod, where the knowledge comes from, to build Babel City, Babel Tower. And he imposes that religion on everybody. And Babel is the Hebrew word for Babylon that we see in the New Testament show up for the Babylon religion that's coming in the end time. So yes, this is all about setting up the new Nimrod as an antichrist with that antediluvian Babel religion to have complete control over humankind and take them into utter destruction.
You know, Top just said it that we want to respect your time, but I gotta snake this one in there. Sorry, I have a notebook full of questions. I know we're not gonna get to them, but we're in the middle of this really fascinating thing, right? End times prophecy talks about the Euphrates River drying up. Anybody can look at the Euphrates right now and go, well, that's not a wet river anymore. There are two things that I've noticed have come out of this situation. One is this these articles about structures being found in the riverbed. Indicators that at some point there was actually some sort of building down there or something of that nature. And the other one is a video that is not necessarily something you can verify, but locals claiming that there are sort of screams coming from holes in the riverbed. Now that is not necessarily, like I said, could be unsubstantiated, but I would love to know your thoughts. Is this an indicator that we are, in fact, in those end times? What do you make of the Euphrates River drying up?
So again, we don't want to get ahead of end time chronology. There is a generation. I think we are in the fig tree generation, but the timing of the Euphrates drying up is to make the way for the kings of the east. This would be Xi's uh, group of nations for Armageddon, and that would put that at towards the end of the last 7 years. So, and there's a large event that's going to take place before Armageddon and in the year of the Lord's favor, where Israel and Judah are reconciled back into the covenant and recognize Jesus as the Redeemer in time for the supper of the Lamb in Revelation 19 as part of the bride, as they're called and prophesied to be in the Old Testament. And so I'll start with a New Testament prophecy that talks about this river Euphrates that is going to be dried up, and show you a bit of the source for it. And there's also 4 angels tied to the Euphrates River that they're going to do this at a specific time. So in Revelation 12, you have a prophecy of the 12 tribes of Israel and being persecuted by the dragon and Antichrist, and dragon spews out this river. And this happens in the time frame when Antichrist has come to power, and he's part of the persecution of not only Judah, awakened lost tribes of Israel, and all those who hold to the testimony of Jesus in that time. This is in the second half of the last 7 years, or the Great Tribulation not seen since before creation versus the tribulation of the saints. Now, as we understand that, in Matthew 24, where Jesus lays out his chronological template, you have the abomination at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and told to reference the Daniel prophecies for understanding. And that we know there's a chronological order there that he's providing us, because he uses the word then. That's the Greek word tota. That means exactly that. It's not inserted by translators. It means these are chronological order of events, and punctuated by the abomination at the midpoint, as Daniel defines it, and when Antichrist comes to power. So they flee when they see the abomination out of Jerusalem to the wilderness to be protected for 3.5 years. But Antichrist, working with Satan, the dragon spews this river to try and destroy Judah, fleeing Judah to the wilderness. And so I think this is the Euphrates River. Now, how I get there from there, not only the timing, but we get Old Testament passages in the time of the second Exodus where the breaker, Jehovah, will lead and break lost Israel out of prisons, and also lead visible Judah around the world back to meet Judah in the desert for this reconciliation. After Judah has fled, they also realize that Jesus is the one that they pierced with the sign that is out there. And you have this reconciliation that's going on. Well, in Isaiah 27 and 28 and Isaiah 43, in the time of that second Exodus, you have this great river, Euphrates, that is overflowing the great Exodus. But whether fire or river, Yahweh, Jehovah, will save them from that destruction to do this exodus back to the land of the covenant. And now you join that up with Ezekiel 37, as they have, Israel and Judah have their own judgment and their own resurrection that's separate from the church resurrection. And that's depicted in Ezekiel 37 in the dry bones. And Some are going to be raised to everlasting life, and some to everlasting judgment. And that's the time of the last 3.5 years, in the time of trouble, as Daniel 12 talks about, when Michael stands, just as Michael stands in the war at the midpoint in Revelation 12. And that time of trouble is the last 3.5 years, as that prophecy goes on. And it's the Hebrew word sarah, which is the same cognate word for tribulation translated into English. It could be trouble, could be affliction, could be tribulation. You could use the same word. And it's the same cognate passage in Matthew 24:21, when it's time of the great tribulation of the world, not seen since the beginning of time. That's the Greek word thlipsis. Mark 13:19 describes the same passage, but he doesn't use tribulation, he uses affliction. Same word, Greek word thlipsis. Same word for affliction that happens with the tribulation of the saints in Matthew 24:8-10 or so. That affliction goes back to thlipsis. It's the same word as tribulation that's in Revelation 7, that the martyred saints are told to wait for those to be martyred in the tribulation of the saints are to wait for. So you have this cognate word of sarah with thlipsis, and in this case, the great tribulation in the last 3.5 years, that is used also in the time of Jacob's trouble of the second Exodus. And that's the Hebrew word sarah again. And then after that resurrection and judgment that Daniel 12 talks about for his people, not Christians, but for his people, you have the second Exodus meeting up where both sticks are joined. And that's the same timing as what you have following the Gog War and the second Exodus that's described in Ezekiel 39. And you have so many passages on the second Exodus that too many to go into, but I just wanted to show the timing of all of that as being a second half event that would prepare. If you blew up all of the dams that were on the Euphrates River, it would be the spewing river, and it would dry up probably with all the other things that are going on between the wars and stuff. So I think a long answer to a short question, but it's important to understand that we're not there yet. And so we have to be careful so as to not get ahead of things on the chronology of the end time. So we're still in the Soros period, I think. So we still need to see the world government show up with the Seventh Empire. We need the universal religion. Daniel 9:27 hasn't happened yet, where you have as part of that 7-year covenant, the ability for the people of Judah to accept Antichrist and then begin, or at least start to look at him as a Messiah-like figure. And in that covenant, they're permitted to do sacrifices on a wing or an extremity or an overspreading of the temple. That hasn't happened yet. So the sorrows are all the same catastrophes that happen in the seal judgments, and the identical catastrophes that happen in the trumpets and in the wrath bowls. And as the sorrows come out over the last generation, they increase in intensity, so much so you get 25% destruction of the whole world in the seal judgments, and then 33% in the trumpets, and then 100% what it would be, because they want to destroy the world, because it's like Shiva's destruction to start a renewal and the phoenix coming out of the ashes, and they're sort of allegories for this world not reserved for humans because they're trying to destroy us all. These destructions are not only the same, but they are all contrived destructions and catastrophes. So in other words, it's what the world brings on, and it's just permitted to happen. So the restrainer, and I think it's probably Michael, but it could be the Holy Spirit, that's removed, is preventing Antichrist from coming to power. And Michael fights against the beast empires, not for them rising, but from Antichrist taking over one of those beast empires until the ordained time, which is why he sits down and is shown being seated in Daniel 12, but then rises to take on the invading army in Revelation 12, same time frame.
Yeah, he was battling the Prince of Persia at one point.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, I mean, it's late in the episode. This is our first super chat, and I'm going to read it. You don't have to answer it. They said, I'm curious if Gary or you guys know about the Knights Templar, Timothy Hogan, and the Templars' mission to make the U.S. The new Atlantis.
Yep.
And also if it's a bad thing to remake the 10 Kingdoms. Guys, thank you for the money. Please ask sooner. But
So I cover that all off in detail in book 1. And so the simple answer is yes. So the Templar dream was to bring about the new Atlantis in the end time, and utilizing their power from within the Roman Church to try and bring that about. So the 10 kings of Atlantis, because there were 10 kings of that empire, is the same number that they want to have for the end time, and is what is prophesied. So yes, they want to bring that about. So Francis Bacon coins the term New Atlantis in his book, The New Atlantis, about the end time, when you have their religion coming to merge back with its home sacred sciences and in harmony in the end time, along with the 10 kings of the new Atlantis, which is the same thing as the New Age. And so, yeah, this is what they're planning. And it's not as important to figure out how you get to the fulfillment of prophecy. It's just that the prophecy is fulfilled. So, for example, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, you can make a really good argument that the secret societies, the Rothschilds and the Bloodlines, they planned the creation state of Israel as being satanic Jews versus monotheist Jews and the Bloodlines to bring about the end time. Who cares? There's still a remnant of Jewish people that God is going to fight for in the end time. They just need to be in place for that Gog war, that counterfeit war for Armageddon. So same thing with the bringing about of the New World Order. How it arrives, we'll have to wait and see exactly how it plays out. But it does arrive, and there will be those 10 kings, and they're using the allegory of the Golden Age and the New Age that they want to bring out as one of the same thing. And what happened in the age of Atlantis? That's when they created their spurious offspring of the giants, and the gods walked amongst them, and they were in total rebellion against God, and they were about to destroy the earth. That's the end time that is coming, like the days of Noah.
So
The
then,
Great
yes,
Awakening.
it is bad to remake the 10 Kingdoms of Atlantis.
It's bad. It just seems unavoidable.
It's bad.
It seems
It's
not a great thing.
Yeah, it's not good. It'll be promised as utopia, but it will deliver dystopia.
As it always will. Gary, thank you for sitting down with us. And I think the audience is they love this. They said, does it have to end? Yes, it does have to end. We have to let them go. Yeah, again, we appreciate your time. You're doing work that is just incredible, and more people should read this. Please go buy this book, go read this, and then buy the second one. It's on pre-order, right?
It is, and books were supposed to be shipped this week. I haven't got notification, so hopefully next week, and it's going to beat the release date of March 12th. So yeah, very much looking forward to it. And this book is as unique as the first book. The first book is sort of a globalist perspective, and it connects the dots over 6,000 years of this conspiracy of nothing new under the sun and why we're here. And then book 2 was written specifically for Christians, even though if you're not a Christian, you're going to learn more about giants than what you've ever learned before in book 2. And the giants that are in the Bible, all the different names. You're going to learn about the different angels, the classification of the angels, the hierarchy of the angels. You're going to learn about who the hybrids are, how they came about, how they fit in. You're going to learn about in detail all of the giant wars in the post-Diluvian epoch. You're going to understand the difference between Rephaim and Nephilim. And I'm going to use those terms and then context to lay down my approach for prophecy and lay down the chronology as I go through in the end time. You can't do every detail in it, but you'll get the concept in place, and it so simple. I explain the concept in the preface, and it's simple things like don't ignore inconvenient passages. But the most important thing is put everything around what Jesus said and not vice versa. And for the people who say you can't do that with Revelation, you can. And I'll show you how to do that in book 2, and understand that in verses Revelation 1 through 1:3, Revelation is the testimony of Jesus Christ given to the angel to show John. It cannot be in conflict with his template that he put down in Matthew 24. And then I use the additional details of Mark 13, Luke 17, and 21 to add on to the Matthew template. And then you can overlay Revelation and any other prophet without conflict. You want the conflicts to disappear? Put everything around what Jesus said, not vice versa. Things will automatically fall into place.
Incredible. I'm about halfway through the first one. I'm gonna order the second one now. Really looking forward to getting into like more knowledge about angels. But thank you again. And for what it's worth, I do think that your second cover, I heard you talking about the design, very solid design. You guys flipped the color scheme. It looks great.
Yep. Yeah, I wanted it to be connected but not too close. And the first one was good, but the sales force said we need to get a more different color variation because we don't want people to confuse the books. And the seal is different. So on the first one, I have a dragon seal. This one, if you can look closely at the new one, it has a seal that has the trumpets and the bowl, the wrath bowls in the seal, and then the background is a scroll, and that's why you see a jagged line in the middle.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's take a look at that. Sorry, pulling it up now.
And I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 on my website and all 84 chapters of book 2. And it's just, even though it's a generous excerpt, it's a small amount of what's in the book.
It is dense. Yes. Again, thank you for your time. And guys, I think we're back next week. So we'll see you sometime next week. Anything, David?
No, keep an eye out. Next week we've got Faceless coming up on Friday. And that's about it, guys.
All right. Take care, guys. See you later.
The greatest hypnotist on planet Earth is a oblong box in the corner of the room. It is constantly telling us what to believe is real. If you can persuade people that what they see with their eyes is what there is to see, you got them. Because they'll laugh in the face of an explanation that portrays the bigger picture of what's happening. And they have.